So today I want to talk about Buffalo, New York's mayoral candidate, India Walton. After defeating the Democratic incumbent candidate, Brian Brown, in the primaries this week, India Walton is likely to be the first socialist mayor of a major U.S. city since 1960, when Frank Zeidler left office in Milwaukee, meaning she will be the first socialist mayor of a major U.S. city in over 60 years. And given that, I wanted to take some time to go over how she describes herself and talk about her policies and her plans. With that said, let's take a look at her description on her website. So, India Walton embodies Buffalo's sense of resilience. Born and raised on Buffalo's east side as one of 6 children, India became a full-time working mother at the age of just 14. She earned her GED while pregnant with twins who were born prematurely, an experience that inspired her to become a nurse in the same NICU where her boys' lives were saved. As a healthcare worker, India became a representative in the 1199 SEIU union, standing up for both workers and patients from picket lines in Buffalo to the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court, where she was invited to speak at a national women's rights rally in 2014. Continuing to serve as a nurse in Buffalo public schools, India witnessed the health disparities among our most vulnerable citizens and became determined to change the systems that cause these injustices. India's commitment to systemic change called her to become a community organizer for Open Buffalo, establishing herself as a thought leader on a wide range of issues, including criminal justice reform and fair housing. Her work on the latter led her to be named the founding executive director of the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust, for which she worked with longtime residents to develop permanently affordable housing. So there's a lot of good here. She's a union worker who was working in healthcare. It's not the typical political form for a healthcare worker to go into this. She's done work within the union, both on the picket line in Buffalo, and has been invited to the steps of the Supreme Court to protest and to do things there and speak there. She has been a nurse in the school system, so she's got a lot of community understanding about the schools and the health disparities involved. This is someone who has a lot of knowledge about the community and how it functions. And this Fruit Belt Community Land Trust, I ended up looking them up. And this is a phenomenal idea if we're ever going to move in the direction of starting to make housing available for everyone, especially with the way that the housing market has just gotten out of hand. So a community land trust is a nonprofit organization governed by a board of CLT residents, community residents, and public representatives that provide lasting community assets and shared equity homeownership opportunities for families and communities. CLTs develop rural and urban agricultural projects, commercial spaces to serve local communities, affordable rental and cooperative housing projects, and conserve land or urban green spaces. However, the heart of their work is the creation of homes that remain permanently affordable. None of this buying and selling and, flipping houses and liquidating houses that we talked about recently this week. No, this is supposed to be permanently affordable, providing successful homeownership opportunities to lower income families for generations to come. Meaning that this is going to provide some sustainability for people to not lose their homes. And this is a fantastic project. This is something that I'd like to see a lot more of. And honestly, I learned a lot looking through this. The goal is that they acquire property, they rehabilitate structures to create these permanently affordable housing community spaces, and then the homes are affordable in perpetuity. So there's always a safe, affordable place to call home for individuals and families in our communities. And that's significant and really important. And this is the type of projects that India Walton was working on. And this is before we even get into any of her policies and positions. Briefly, before I go any further, I just want to note that the Teachers Federation of Buffalo supports her, and that Progressive Women of New York does, as well as the Grassroots Law Project. There's a lot of organizations here that support her that are leaning in the progressive direction. And so that's kind of awesome in that regard. And when we look at her issues, I just want to show this very quickly, and then I want to jump to Byron Brown, rather, her political opponent in this recent campaign, and show the difference between what we're looking at. The key campaign issues, she has this broken down in terms of public safety, housing, immigration, pandemic recovery, the arts, climate, economic development, education, food access, and infrastructure. Each of these contain their own short-term 100-day plans, near-term 6-month to 1-year plans, and long-term 1 to 4-year plans. This is a well-thought-out plan that is being developed over in a period of 4 years, which would be her time in office, I presume. Assuming that she's given the full length of time. And this is what we're seeing here. This is a comprehensive plan discussing everything. Meanwhile, when we go to Byron Brown's website, here's what we see. And I had to pull this up from a 4-minute clip. This is basically his plan. Encourage and incentivize investment, maintain our infrastructure efficiently, deliver services. There's nothing here. This is just a promise of the status quo and nothing's going to change. And when you compare this, and you can get your own lawn sign if you just put your name and everything, and you just vote for me. Like, there was no expectation, no effort on this website. This 4-minute video, it's just not really doing much to secure any sort of goals or plans. With India Walton here, when we look at this, we can say, well, in the first 100 days, if she doesn't do this, why? Why didn't this get done? On Byron Brown's, we have nothing. So I do want to go over her key campaign issues because I think there's also a lot of good stuff here. And I think it's a good representation of how we can move from short-term goals to make sustainable change into transitioning into longer-term goals. Even if you're someone who is an anarchist or much further left than a lot of these policies, this ability to shift in this direction and to recognize that people are starting to move in these directions is very important, and we should very much support this as far as I'm concerned. So, key campaign issues. Our platform is centered on people and rooted in love, with the belief that equity and justice are essential. We believe in love for community, respect for culture, and reverence for resources. We believe that housing, healthcare, healthy food, and quality education are basic human rights, and when we invest in our community, we create the conditions where all residents feel valued and can thrive. Buffalo is rich in resources, from our waterfront location to our wonderful arts and cultural community. It has many economic engines. We envision a Buffalo where people are housed, healthy, and have agency to live to their full potential. As we build our platform and community with stakeholders, we invite everyone to send suggestions. And so we start with public safety. Short-term policy goals. Remove police from responding to most mental health calls and work with county and Buffalo Police Department leaders to establish a new response to crisis mental health calls that utilizes mental health professionals. Thank you. I just need to say that. Thank you. That is one of the easiest and quickest things that can be done. And this is a first 100 days goal for this person. The idea that we can start shifting police away from being the first people to respond to mental health crises, that we can start having mental health workers take the lead in a lot of these positions, is something that we really need to explore in every major city. This is a good, and I'm hoping that this ends up being something that leads a lot of people to start taking similar positions and policies in other major cities. End enforcement of low-level drug possession by directing police not to arrest people for simple possession of a small amount of drugs or paraphernalia like syringes. Order the law department to conduct a full review of the city's ability to discipline and fire bad police officers and defend disciplinary decisions to the fullest possible extent. Now, I'm someone who's fully in support of abolition, but to be able to do that within the first 100 days of office, that's a significant shift in a positive direction. Make police data public to the extent allowed by law, including data on racial disparities in stops and arrests, officer disciplinary records, the number of officers who live outside the city, and an inventory of weapons and military equipment owned by the police department. Within 6 months to a year, work with the Buffalo Common Council to amend the city charter to establish an independent oversight board body with investigatory and subpoena power. Train officers in trauma-informed care and implicit bias. Increase the number of trained community-oriented officers. Mandate unpaid leave for police officers being investigated for police brutality. Establish a civilian traffic safety division to enforce routine traffic safety laws and remove police from routine traffic enforcement. That one is key and important. Traffic enforcement is one of the ways in which police consistently abuse their power and commit acts of brutality. When you can pull someone over indiscriminately for a taillight being busted or for any number of other reasons that they can invent, then they are able to escalate that into a full-blown conflict that oftentimes leaves people injured, wounded, arrested, or dead. And that is something significant where we can have a civilian traffic safety division take that over. That's another great plan to start moving in the direction of defunding and de-escalating the police from having presence in our daily lives as much as they do. Create a task force to investigate every police officer and fire or demote officers with consistently bad records. As much as I don't think that's going to fix everything in the end of the day, the idea that they are actually going to be in some ways held at least a little bit accountable is a good thing. And it's something definitely to look into. Long-term policy goals in 1 to 4 years: create unarmed public safety detail to address quality of life and social calls to 911. Freeing trained police officers to focus on solving crime. Fund and expand proven public safety programs such as law enforcement assisted diversion, LEAD, and violence interruption programs like Advanced Peace. Invest in crime prevention strategies such as youth employment programs like Mayor's Summer Youth and Crime Prevention through environmental design. Start employing people in things like how to take care of the environment, how to start looking at how to shape the future. That's great. That is a definite direction moving away from a lot of these things. And when you think about crime prevention, you no longer have to have the police. And this is all moving in the direction of making the police a much more obsolete institution. County public participation in union contract negotiations to the extent allowed by law, and ensure meaningful ongoing public input into all police department functions and union contract negotiations, and cement this public right into the future by law. This is all great stuff. As we get into housing, we find more great stuff. Sign the Tenants' Bill of Rights to strengthen local protections for renters. She wants to provide financial relief to small landlords. So we're not talking about the large corporations that buy up multiple properties. We're talking about somebody who might own a property or two. So you're going to give them financial relief in exchange for rent forgiveness for tenants. That's a win-win. With the way that the economic crash is about to show up, the bubble that's about to burst because of all the people who will have months and months and months of back paid rent, the idea that you can come up with a deal where on behalf of tenants, where you give landlords, small landlords in particular, a small amount of money and funding in order to forgive tenants, ends up being a winning situation all around. Is it optimal? Is it ideal? Ideally, I don't want to deal with landlords. I want to move away from that system. But this is definitely something that can put a very important stitching to a very, very open wound right now. Direct the city's Department of Permit and Inspection Services to put an emergency stay on the demolition of historically designated buildings. Landlord registration. Create and publicize a user-friendly online portal where tenants can type in a property's address and get landlord information, including history of property violations. That is a huge power to renters and those that are in a position where they want or need to rent, especially because if you go to rent a property, typically, you have no idea who the landlord is. They can investigate you. They can pay for all sorts of services to find out about you as the renter, but you don't often have information on the landlord. So if they've had property violations, if they've left places in terrible conditions before, you don't have access to that information. This registry would make that available to people, and that is significant and important and will actually change lives. require LLCs to disclose contact information and addresses of interested parties, and increase regulations and requirements for property maintenance agencies. Implement a comprehensive land use policy that sets aside 50% of city-owned vacant parcels for public good. Allow for longer grace periods to cure past due taxes and user fees to foreclosure actions, meaning it's now harder for places to foreclose on you. Create a pot of funds to assist homeowners who've fallen behind on their property taxes due to an unexpected hardship, such as job loss, medical bills, etc. This could provide a one-time payment to assist homeowners in getting back on track to pay their taxes, which would save many from unnecessary and devastating foreclosure. And this is really important because the amount of people in the United States that are one bad thing, one medical bill, one bad month of job loss away from losing everything, from losing their home. This creates a small pot, a small funding that says, well, if that happens to you, we're going to take care of you for a month. We're going to look after you. You're a part of our community and we don't want you to lose your home. And to me, that is really important. A lot of these policies really are ways that are going to tangibly just make life a little bit better for people under our current structures and systems. Give communities control to democratically regulate themselves through establishing ground-up neighborhood planning efforts, work with block clubs and existing community organizations to create just neighborhood plans that empower residents to take control of the regulation of their own neighborhoods by forming neighborhood committees, including the power to approve and deny planning and zoning. That is significant, putting people in charge of their own neighborhoods to say what can be planned and moved in and what can't be. Can we have a commercial space come in here? Can we have an industrial space come in here? Can we plan this for more housing and all this stuff? Communities being able to control that is a significant change in policy from the way things have always been handled. And finally, the long-term policies of the housing conversation support the creation and capacity of a citywide land trust federation with democratic decision-making at the neighborhood level. Repair and redress the harm done to public housing and allow for greater resident control of the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. Implement Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act upon enactment by New York State Legislature. This is meant that when a property goes up for sale, existing tenants will have the first option to buy the property. TOPA programs provide funding and technical assistance for tenants to do this. If a tenant does not want the ability to purchase, they can assign their right to purchase the property to a local nonprofit housing agency, which will then manage the property. That is huge because too many times they go to sell the property and they sell it to someone else, and a lot of things can go wrong in that. Including the idea of another landlord coming in and kicking people out of the property. So tenants now have the opportunity first to purchase this property and can appeal to getting assistance for buying it. And this keeps people in homes. It keeps people in a place where they're able to actually secure property. That's significant. And they can assign the right to purchase the property to a local nonprofit housing agency, which will manage the property in the interim. That's amazing. More cities need to be doing stuff like this. When we get into the topic of immigration, declare Buffalo a sanctuary city so that they don't cooperate with ICE, basically. That's all that's going to come down to. Detaining an individual based on civil immigration detainers after the individual becomes eligible for release custody, things like that. Provide information about the release status of personal information of individuals, except in limited circumstances when law enforcement may respond to ICE requests. Limit city services or benefits based on immigration status, unless required by federal and state. There's... Basically, what they're trying to do here is make sure that city employees are not using city resources to cause harm towards people based on immigration status. They will not ask about immigration status. They will not limit city services. They will not provide information about the release of release status or personal information. And they will not detain an individual based on civil immigration detainer stuff. This is all good things to see here. They're going to end the police department's cooperation with ICE. They're going to ensure that all aid agencies work for the needs of all residents regarding their immigration status. City agencies will maintain open dialogue and ongoing outreach with communities they serve. They will then, in the near term, dedicate funding for legal services that offer options to grant fee waivers for adjustment of status fees, work permit fees, citizenship fees, and deferred action for childhood arrival fees. Improve outreach and accessibility for the Office of New Americans, which should act as a liaison offering funding opportunities for all organizations providing direct services, community education, and advocacy to immigrant communities. Improve accessibility to city agency services through improved and expanded language access. And in the long term, actively recruit multilingual officers to serve communities and increase trust between new residents and police. One of the ways to do that is to hire police straight from the communities. It's not the optimal solution as far as I'm concerned, but it's certainly one that will make direct interactions with the police a little bit easier and a little bit better. Increase civic participation by all residents through establishment of facilitation of neighborhood caucuses that encourage democratic participations, regardless of voting/immigration status. So yeah, you get to participate in your neighborhood regardless of whether or not you're an immigrant and whether or not you're legally allowed to vote. So pandemic recovery, it's just going to be establishing clear lines of communication and work with experts to help in that regard, reduce barriers of assistance to tenants, landlords, homeowners, and small businesses, especially when in underserved and traditionally places underserved by traditional financial institutions. Work with existing community centers and organizations so resources and mutual aid can be democratically governed and deployed efficiently at the neighborhood level. That's awesome, honestly. Again, another person talking about mutual aid. I'm really grateful that mutual aid, especially over the course of this pandemic, has become more normalized. And it just shows a tendency that anarchist ideas have really started to move into affecting a lot of policy, even if anarchists may not be themselves mainstream at this point. The arts. Short-term policy goals. Establish a transparent and democratic model to more art organizations in the city. Commit to commissioning local and underrepresented artists and art forms for city contracts. Invest in frontline art organizations. Create art programs to reach immigrants, differently abled, and low-income members of the community. Yeah, that's another one. Too often, we find that the arts are exclusively available to wealthier people, at least middle class, if not upper class people, who are only able to access artistic programs through their wealth and status. So this is actually really important. Art is an important outlet and can be used as a tool to talk about things like oppression, the issues going on in our community, and so much more. And they want to create and identify a non-permitting area of the city dedicated to public art. These free zones where Buffalo City residents can gather to perform, create, and experience art without the need of a permit. That's a significant thing. Being able to have free permission where you don't have to petition to go do something and everyone can come out into one central space and just do art, do the things that they want to be doing. That is absolutely wonderful, and more cities need to follow this plan. Advocate for more union jobs in the film industry and seek state support for big and small projects. Incorporate more educational opportunities in public schools and local colleges to get involved in the local film industry. Establish Buffalo as an international destination for arts and culture, and treat the arts as an economic driver it is, and ensure that the city infrastructure policy and budget allocations reflect that. In terms of the climate, short-term policies, endorse and support the passage of the New York State Climate Leadership, convene city council, officials, community leaders to produce a comprehensive climate action plan, establish a sustainable workforce roundtable to inform new green workforce initiatives, improve stormwater management plans. Another important one, it's going to affect people's lives. Establish an Office of Sustainability to monitor efforts to reduce emissions. Engage in regional climate initiatives to work with other municipalities to advance our climate goals. Convert the city of Buffalo fleets to electric cars within the next 4 years. Update the Green Code to provide for aspects of zoning that make strong, resilient, climate-safe communities, and create and implement a retree initiative in East Buffalo. So I actually think this is one area that there could be something more comprehensive here. Some of the short and near-term goals here, while they're good, do not really have the same level of this is directly what I'm going to do. It's kind of more like I'm going to create a plan. So I would have liked to have seen more here personally, but there is still a lot here to work with. And the idea of converting the fleet to electric cars in 4 years and updating the Green Code and potentially holding polluters accountable and creating a retree initiative could all be significant changes that could be looked forward to in the next 4 years. I'd like to see more about this green workforce initiative, honestly, especially developed over the next years for anybody in Buffalo. Commit to full minority woman ownership owned business enterprises, compliance for city funded projects, prioritize small and minority owned local businesses through the RFP process to increase successful bids for small local contractors. Add new procurement criteria and set measurable benchmarks to grant more contracts to locally owned independent businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, and to buy more environmentally sustainable goods and services. Make appointments based on expertise, diversity, and inclusion rather than political patronage. Work to establish a public bank. India will advocate for this at the state level and ensure it is a priority to invest in our city dollars in a public bank that invests in our communities, not in fossil fuels or carceral institutions to make profit, and establish a comprehensive and transparent participatory budgeting process. A public bank could be significant. You kind of would have a state nationalized bank, as it were. I could see that having significant advantages over a lot of the private bank institutions, especially in terms of providing economic development to smaller businesses in this economy and in this reality. In terms of education, appoint a staff person to attend meetings. Support the whole child, whole school, whole community agenda of trauma-informed and culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. Thank you. There is too much where it's this idea that children are supposed to just go in and there isn't a understanding of culture, where trauma is not understood, and especially linguistic stuff is completely ignored. And to be able to talk about that as part of a community and to address that on that level is very important for children's lives and education. If it will influence most of their lives. And, education really does have a huge impact on how and why we move through the world in our adult lives. Advocate for locally sourced and culturally appropriate meal options for all students. Create a dedicated budget line for BPS separate and apart from the general fund. Partner with local companies, nonprofits, and universities and city departments to create paid internships for students, which is kind of significant because that'll give students an edge in the fact that they will have a paid internship that will provide them skills and training, as opposed to most internships which still don't really pay, and a lot of jobs who want people with multiple years of experience ahead of time. Paid employment opportunities promote college and career readiness, improve family health and safety, and help students build a confidence alongside their resumes. In terms of food access and infrastructure, and then we'll wrap this up. Work the Common Council to amend food store licensing requirements to include fresh produce. That's really important. A lot of places don't have fresh produce. And a lot of places can't sell it because of requirements for licensing. And it can create all sorts of food deserts for a lot of communities and places. So that's a really important one. Pre-identify lots appropriate for community gardens and ensure access to water. I know this shouldn't have to be said, but there are still communities that don't have access to good water. I don't know what Buffalo's status with water is, but if you have a community garden, you do need to make sure that it has access to water. And community gardens can often supplement and assist people in their nutrition and health. prohibit discrimination of breastfeeding mothers in the workplace and in public places where a mother and child would otherwise be present. So this is another good one and another important one, because in many cases there is a lot of discrimination against breastfeeding mothers in public places and the workplace. It's something that I might consider talking about another time in a future video, because this actually ends up being a much bigger issue than it should be, considering that's kind of the biological function of breasts and breastfeeding. So, yeah, that is a component there. Near-term policy goals: support community-based initiatives to increase access to fresh and healthy food, including neighborhood-owned grocery stores, community gardens, and farmers markets. Ensure access to healthy, culturally appropriate, and affordable food for all residents, regardless of income, and promote personal wellness. Reduce the disparities in health outcomes by allocating resources to deploy community health workers in target zip codes, and provide a tax credit against the city's personal property tax imposed on qualified supermarkets within defined food desert incentive areas. Yeah, a lot of supermarkets don't want to open in certain neighborhoods or areas because they're not deemed as profitable. So by providing a tax break to the supermarket in these areas, you can incentivize them to come into food deserts and make sure people have access to foods. Under our current economic conditions and systems, with capitalism being a major problem in terms of food access, that is a good band-aid solution that will actually improve people's lives in the short term. So in terms of infrastructure, halt the school zone camera program, which is designed to basically get tickets to people. So there's alternative ways with what was mentioned before about having community people come out and handle traffic instead. Pilot a municipal sidewalk snow removal program. Implement snow and ice clearing assistance programs. Target infrastructure investment to create safe streets, calming traffic, and increasing accessibility for people of all ages and ability. Reduce the speed limit on residential streets to 25 miles per hour. And something like that, like, people ignore how something like a speed limit can really change a community and it can save lives. These are the small little things, the logistical things that I feel like someone who's had access to knowing their community is going to be able to address. It's an issue that can often go underlooked by larger bureaucratic institutions. And for someone who's on the ground, who's been in the city for their whole life and who knows the streets a little bit and knows the way that the people function and what's needed, that's the type of goal I'd expect from someone who's lived in an area for a long period of time and knows what they're talking about. And that, to me, is something to look out for when you're looking at somebody like this, if we're going to deal with the political realm of things in terms of voting people in. Create a municipal broadband network to expand access to affordable, high-speed internet across the city, particularly in underserved neighborhoods. Yes, please go into public broadband. It's another thing that I really feel is worth covering. With the way the pandemic manifested, public broadband should have been a right beforehand and definitely should be now. High-speed internet access is becoming a critical factor, not just in employment, but in schooling, in terms of how we deal with our day-to-day lives. The internet has just become more and more entrenched in our daily existence, and it's important for everybody to have access to it at all times and be able to have high speeds or, be able to function on the internet. Commit more funding for the maintenance of sidewalks, roads, signs, streetlights, and street furniture. Street furniture is important. We often overlook that. I know that I talked about the hostile architecture in a previous video. A lot of times we ignore the fact that having a bench for people to sit or having even a chair or something that people can use as furniture in an outdoor setting can influence and make people's lives a little bit better, especially if you're someone who needs to just sit after a long walk, or someone who just wants to hang out in a spot with people in a public area that doesn't require people to go in and have to spend money. Street furniture is really important, and how we design our streets can either decide whether or not we have a hostile environment or we're being inviting to the community around us. color bike lanes, crosswalks, school zones to slow traffic and alert drivers to changes in speed limits and traffic patterns, and in the long term, bring municipal snow removal to scale. So that was a lot. If you followed me all the way here, I do think that this is someone who has a lot of great ideas that they want to implement. And I'll be curious to see if they're able to implement all of that and make these policies happen. I would be very interested in following her campaign if she does in fact get elected, which likely she will, given that Buffalo is pretty much straight a Democrat town, or city rather, and I imagine that she's going to get elected and again be the first socialist mayor in almost 60 years in the United States in a major city. And that's highly significant, and I really do want to follow her and see what ends up coming over the next 4 years in Buffalo, because what happens here could influence a lot of other major US cities and could end up influencing federal policy. I think there's a lot of good here, and if we are to participate in any electoralism, I know a lot of anarchists and leftists are not exactly in favor of electoralism, but if we do engage in it, these are the type of policies that I think we want to see. Somebody with comprehensive plans that are addressing the needs of communities, that have clearly been a part of communities and have been on the ground talking about exactly what people want and need, and extending things that are slowly starting to democratize situations. Creating public housing that is affordable and that people can buy into starts moving us in the direction of being able to remove the profit motive from housing and start to move in a direction where maybe housing can become a right. When we talk about healthcare, same type of things. When we talk about schools, same type of things. And whenever we can get community to start influencing and working together in terms of blocks and neighborhoods, that is something that I'm in favor of. And mutual aid being mentioned and talked about in terms of the pandemic is something I'm always welcome to seeing. Might not be the perfect that we all want. It might not be the end goal of how we want to see the society form, but it's a good change that I'm seeing here. And I think it's something that we can, at the very least, even if we don't want to take action involved with it or divert our attention from other resources, it's something to think about, and it's something to keep in the back of our minds about the type of change we want to start seeing in our communities around us and ways we can implement that. So with that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.